I'm a historian. Today we'll be looking at the Kashmir conflict, specifically the borders drawn in blood. If you'd like to watch more videos like this, consider subscribing. Alright, let's get right into it. So what is happening in Kashmir, and why should you care? What's so important about this place? Well, it's kind of strategically located. It's up there in the mountains. You can see Jammu and Kashmir in the upper left. And then over here you have Ladakh. To the west of Ladakh is the disputed region of Aksai Chin, which is controlled by China. And then down here is something else called Gilgit-Baltistan. But what you need to know is that Jammu and Kashmir is right next door to India, also next door to Pakistan, and also next door to China. It's like a tri-point almost, where these three countries meet. Also, this is the headwaters of the Indus River, which is shared by all three countries. So if you want to control the Indus River, well, you want to control Kashmir. And because of that strategic importance, Kashmir is really valuable. In terms of numbers, there are about 14 million people living in Kashmir. That's about the same as Iran, and slightly less than the Philippines. 2/3 of the population is Muslim, but there are also significant Hindu minorities. So it's not just an India versus Pakistan problem. This also involves China and religion, okay? So before we get to 1947, please just take a minute to put all of this into context. Here we have a satellite photo of the Kashmir region. On the bottom is what we call the line of control. The red is China. The green is Pakistan. The blue is India. This gray squiggle is the actual border between India and Pakistan. Then you got this black squiggle, which is the Chinese border. So this area right here, which is basically like a patchwork quilt, is what they call the disputed territories. We're going to unpack how that happened in a moment. The history of Kashmir goes way back. The ancient Sanskrit epic Mahabharata mentions it. For our purposes, we start with the British Raj. During the British Raj, there were hundreds of princely states across India. They had to be ruled in some kind of order. So Britain came up with this system whereby each state could choose between three options: join India, join Pakistan, or remain independent. So when the British left in 1947, every single one of these states had to make that decision. And most of them decided to join one of the two new powers or the other. But Kashmir was different. This is the last official British map of India. Here's Kashmir, right there. This is the Hindu ruler of a Muslim-majority state. His name was Maharaja Hari Singh. He didn't want to join either India or Pakistan, at least not right away. He wanted to stay independent. That may have been the end of it. But the following year, a group of armed men entered his state and started attacking villages and towns. These men were called Pashtun raiders, and they came from across the border from what is now Pakistan. The Indian government suspected that these raids were being backed by the government of Pakistan. Now, Pakistan denies this, but I mean, it does seem pretty obvious. Anyway, the Maharaja went to New Delhi and asked for troops to put down this rebellion. But India said, well, first, you need to sign the instrument of accession. So he did that on October 26, 1947. The very next day, Indian troops crossed the line of control and headed towards Srinagar. This is considered the start of the First Indo-Pakistan War. Pakistan immediately sent its own troops into the fray. Fighting continued until January of 1949. At the end of it, the two sides agreed to stop fighting along this line of control, which was basically the de facto border. In 1948, the UN passed a resolution calling for a plebiscite in Kashmir, but that never happened. It's still an ongoing dispute. Now, after 1949, things were relatively quiet. There wasn't much fighting, but that doesn't mean it was peaceful. Both India and Pakistan maintained large militaries along the border. They regularly exchanged fire, and sometimes they would even have intense battles. But overall, the situation was sort of stable. Then in 1965, things kicked off again. So this is during the Cold War. In fact, it was the same year that the Beatles released their album, Yesterday and Today, the one with the butchers. Well, in 1965, Pakistan launched something called Operation Gibraltar. Their plan was to send infiltrators across the line of control to spark a rebellion in Kashmir, but it failed. And then India counterattacked. Before long, you had 250,000 Indian troops facing off against 500,000 Pakistanis. The fighting lasted 2 weeks. It took place in places like Lahore, Akora, and Kem Karon. There were lots of tank battles, air battles. It was an absolute nightmare. When it was over, nothing had really changed. The borders were about the same as they were before. India ended up occupying some territory around the town of Tithwell, and that's still part of the dispute today. But we're going to talk more about that later. In 1971, there was another India-Pakistan war. It's called the Bangladesh Liberation War. We're not going to focus on that today. But it does bear mentioning because while the war itself didn't involve Kashmir, the results did. Pakistan was split into modern Pakistan and Bangladesh. As a result, India's borders changed. But most importantly, the amount of political and social tension along the border with Pakistan was greatly reduced. Any rebel groups in Kashmir that were supported by Pakistan no longer had access to an independent Pakistan that could back them. But that hasn't stopped them from trying. After the war in 1971, relations between India and Pakistan improved. They signed something called the Simla Agreement. Basically, it said that any disputes between India and Pakistan should be resolved bilaterally. It shouldn't involve anyone else. It was meant to signal to the world that these two countries were willing to put aside their differences and work together. But it didn't really work out. The next major incident was the Kargil War in 1999. This was during the leadership of Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan and Atal Bihari Vajpayee in India. Both leaders are now dead. But what happened was that Pakistani soldiers snuck across the line of control into the Indian side of Kashmir. They disguised themselves as militants. They started attacking Indian forces. And it was confusing because they looked like Kashmiri rebels. It wasn't clear who was behind the attacks. India began bombing the heck out of these positions. It was dangerous because this was right after the nuclear tests in Pokhran and the world was nervous. But in the end, India pushed them back across the line of control. It was considered a major victory for India, and it showed that Pakistan was still heavily involved in supporting militants in the region. In 2019, the Indian government revoked Article 370. This gave Jammu and Kashmir a degree of autonomy. Basically, it allowed them to have their own flag and their own constitution and their own laws. Article 370 is now gone. Jammu and Kashmir is now split into two union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. And they have direct rule from New Delhi. The government shut down communications and arrested hundreds of politicians. People protested in the streets. The situation was crazy. Pakistan protested at the United Nations. And everyone was worried that there would be more violence, perhaps another war. But it never happened, and here we are. Now, despite the wars and the border incursions, life goes on. There are kids playing soccer, farmers working in the fields, families celebrating weddings. I guess in a sense, that's the story of most of the 20th century. Even when there's wars and coups and revolutions, life still happens. Okay, alright, that was a lot. Let's break it down. Okay, so the main takeaway here is that the situation in Kashmir is extremely complex. The borders are not recognized internationally. The entire region is militarized. You have three potential nuclear powers with competing territorial claims. The status of Kashmir remains unresolved. In my opinion, there are three possible solutions to the Kashmir conflict. The first solution is to maintain the status quo. Keep things as they are now. India maintains control of the region. Pakistan continues to protest. China keeps their soldiers in the mountains. This solution is unlikely to ever happen because it benefits no one. The second solution is to hold a plebiscite. This is exactly what the UN called for in 1948. Basically, the people of Kashmir vote on whether they want to join India, Pakistan, or remain independent. The third solution is to divide the territory. Maybe the western half goes to Pakistan, and the eastern half goes to India. Perhaps Ladakh could be independent. This is probably the most likely outcome. It seems to be the direction things are heading. Ultimately, though, the question isn't really about which solution is the best or the fairest. That's a moral question. The real question is, what will the major powers allow to happen? In the end, this isn't just about Kashmir. It's about power. It's about borders. It's about geopolitics. Well, that's it for today. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for watching.